So our next speaker is also an activist. She's British Somali. She's also a feminist. She's the co-founder and director of an organization called Daughters of Eve, which is a survivor-led organization that's helped transform the approach to ending female genital mutilation, or FGM. She formerly worked on the Girl Generation, a project to an African-led movement to end FGM within a generation. She's been credited as the person who changed David Cameron's mind about FGM. In 2014, she was named Red Magazine's Woman of the Year. She's also been named by the Sunday Times as one of the 500 most influential people in Britain. And she's also a trustee of Women for Refugee Women and a founding member of the Women's Equality Party. Please give a really warm welcome to Nimko Ali.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to take up the 15 minutes, and it's really touching to come after Hassan. I'm quite moved. I myself became a refugee at the age of 4. At the age of 7, I was living in Manchester. I had a very affluent life. I was traveling the world, and then in the late 80s, we went on holiday to Somaliland. Where is Somaliland, you say? It's a non-recognized state in the Horn of Africa, just above Somalia, that other place you all hear about, which is at war. And it's 27 years old, and it's 27 years since I became a victim, and I'm a survivor of female genital mutilation. So yeah, I have got a list of accolades, but all I really do is talk about vaginas, which are amazing and we need to protect. And I think, and it's really interesting that we're in this special venue about sustainability, and there's nothing more that needs sustaining than women's equality and the right for women and girls to be free from one of the weirdest forms of gender-based violence. So globally, there are 200 million women who are living with FGM, and I'm one of those 200 million women. I came back to the UK as a 7-year-old after having had FGM. And I just thought it was incredibly stupid. I didn't put it into a context of culture. I didn't think it was Islamic. I didn't think it was nothing. I just thought it was really, really weird. And for me, I really wanted context to what this weird thing that had happened to me was. So as I did when I always had conversations, I went to my school teacher and I said, "Miss, this really weird thing happened to me." And I was very graphic. I was very open. I wasn't ashamed. And that's the very interesting thing. And one of the things that I'm very confident about talking to politicians about my anatomy is because I don't feel any shame. I think the people who are perpetuating FGM should feel embarrassed, not necessarily the victims. So I went to my teacher and I said, "This thing happened to me." And she looked at me because I don't think she had the language and the ability to explain it to me. And she said, "Well, this is what happens to girls like you." And I thought, what is that? Girls with curly hair, girls who were born in December, girls who are what? But essentially what she meant is like, this is what happens to girls like you who are from Africa. And I knew that wasn't true because there was other places in Africa where FGM didn't actually happen. So for years and years, I searched for answers. And there are 4 different types of FGM. They're all as wrong as each other. But I had a very invasive form of FGM, which meant that at the age of 11, I had to have medical intervention. And so these are the formative things that have kind of changed my life. So I was dismissed at 7 by my teacher. At 11, I went to a major hospital in Cardiff with a trauma and an injury that would have shocked a lot of people. But because everybody else was too culturally sensitive, they said nothing. They just fixed me up and just let me go. I then went on to read and find Noel Adesalawi, who's an amazing Egyptian writer, and she talked about her FGM. I went on and found George Orwell and realized that some of us just think outside the box. So I just went on and got on with my life thinking everybody's going to connect and realize that FGM is something really weird and it doesn't need to happen. And then I moved to Bristol for university. I finished my degree and I got a very successful job in civil service. And then at a feminist conference, a teacher came to me and she said, "Are you Somali?" I said, "I am." She said, "Do you want to come and talk to my cohort about aspiration and just being different and just thinking outside the box?" And I thought, fine, why not? So I walked into a classroom in 2006 expecting just to talk to young girls about aspiring to go to Oxbridge or Bristol or Durham and all these other constant conversations that we're having about giving young black girls aspirations. I walked into that classroom never thinking that I would leave being told by them that 13 out of those 14 girls in in that classroom had undergone FGM almost 17 years after I was a victim of FGM. I left. I didn't necessarily have the power or the understanding at 22 because I didn't want everybody to look at me as a victim. I was successful, I was intelligent, I was free, I was happy. FGM was nothing to do with me. So I put some beautiful policies together and left and came to London. And then I started to volunteer for an organization in London, and there was a young girl who had the same form of FGM that I had. And she went into a psychological service. So she had a nervous breakdown because of the FGM that she had. And I remember I took her out for 3.5 months. I took her for coffee. I had conversations with her. I kept on telling her everything was going to be okay. I was one of those very understanding aunties or uncles or people we all know saying everything's going to be okay. And then she said to me, I've got an art show in East London. Do you want to come? It's part of my therapy. Weirdly enough, I had a date on that day, and I thought, God, I've got a date. What do I do? But I really love this girl, and I want to support her. So I took my date to East London, not thinking it was going to be my coming out story. So I got there, and I saw this young girl on a stage hyperventilating and falling apart. And in that moment, I understood that my silence was so complicit to the misunderstanding of FGM as something that happened over there, as something that was through ignorance. FGM is a form of gender-based violence, and it's a very organized form of gender-based violence. Every single person that takes part in it knows what's happening. Those who are systematically abusing the girls directly, which is mostly done by women, are doing harm with the best of intentions because they're told, unless you do this, then we're going to do it. So ultimately, the victim becomes the perpetrator, but the real villain is the patriarchy and the inequalities there are within those societies. So I went onto that stage, not realizing the microphone was on. I'm very open about talking about my vagina and what happened to me now, but I wasn't then, and especially not when there was a date in the room. So I went onto the stage not seeing that the microphone was on, and I said to her that everything was going to be okay because I knew what she'd gone through, because I understood. And she said, how do you understand? And I said, because I had the same form of FGM as you had. I came out to a very trendy room in East London, and then also a guy in the corner who wanted an explanation afterwards. So that was my first kind of initial experience of talking about my anatomy and talking about FGM. And I tried to, then in 2011, I gave up my job thinking I'm just going to do this for 6 months. I'm just going to talk to the politicians and they're going to say, fine, we'll sort it out, it's okay. That's not how it worked. So I started a charity called Daughters of Eve to ultimately say that all women come together, and as we were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, we've been blamed for all the ills of the world, and really Eve didn't eat the apple, it was Adam. It was his choice, as I like to say. But I started the charity to, first of all, to change the narrative of FGM. Everybody talked about eradicating FGM as though it was some kind of virus. We needed to end it. I wanted to get the voices of women in Africa to be heard because they were the ones that were leading the conversation. And I did this for 4.5 years. I got David Cameron to say the word clitoris. I also got 36 million pounds out of him to fund an African campaign. I got us to really take seriously the fact that each and every one of us has a role to play in really ending FGM. And then in 2016, I faced my greatest fear, which was to go back to my birthplace of Somaliland and talk about FGM. I went there at first just to relive and just to see the place that I was born, not expecting to do anything about FGM at the beginning. But because we live in such a global world, my conversations about FGM had got to my home country, and I found young people, I found women, and I found politicians that were really, really hungry and really eager to talk about FGM and ending it, but they just didn't have the way to do that. So in 2017, there was going to be the 5th election, and I went there, and I went to go speak to the 3 main candidates that were standing for the presidency and asked them to pass legislation. Would they be committed to passing the legislation to end FGM? I'm going to show a video in a minute. Would they be committed to pass legislation against FGM? Before that, I was meant to go to New York to talk about ending FGM, but I wasn't allowed to go because I'm a Muslim that went to Africa, so America banned me. So I had to Skype into this UN, Gates Foundation event, and there was a guy in that room who said to me, what can I do to help? And I said, I need to get to Africa, I need to get back to Somaliland, and I need to meet these 3 men and get them to commit or even have a conversation with them about ending FGM. That was 12 months ago. That was last August. And within 12 months, with £6,000, we've got legislation passed. Somaliland has one of the youngest populations in the world. 70% of its population is under 30. FGM still stands at 98% in my home country. But I can say in front of you, by 2030, we are going to have a massive reduction. We're going to have a 70% reduction of FGM on a global level. But that is only if we commit and fund women on the front line. So I'm going to show you the video, but I'm just going to ask you three commitments out of you. Talk about the female anatomy. There is nothing scary about it. If we don't talk about it, then others start creating the myths about the clitoris, about the labias, about all those things. So educate yourself, men and women, to support the fact that we as a country have committed 0.7% of our GDP to global development. So we are changing lives on a day-to-day basis around the world. Don't listen to the Daily Mail. Don't listen to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Don't listen to all these people. That money is not being wasted. 3, the only way that we can really and truly end FGM is if we trust women in Africa to really do the work and if we listen to their stories. So if you are going to give, if you do want to do something, then there's an organization called Donor Direct Action, the only organization in the world where up to 90% of every donation you make goes to women. I've worked in NGOs, I've worked for government, and some of our NGOs have a 75% overhead. So 75% of whatever you donate gets spent here. So I'm going to leave you on a positive note, and I'm going to share with you a 2-minute video about ending FGM in Somaliland. With FGM at 98% in Somaliland, it's a massive issue. But each and every one of us has the power to really make change.
إني waxaan ku uri waa la sun waxoogaa bade mid wali la daayo caadi ma arag ya wali weyna daba socdaa in si la daayo oo la joojiyo nolobta.
Women are still being cut up and mutilated and damaged to the point where their life is put in danger. It's ethically wrong. It's professionally wrong. FGM must stop.
كان waxaan ugu rajo weynahay inay insha Allah inay noqoto dawladii ugu horeysay ee suulisa la yiraahdo 100% ma jiraan inay Somaliland noqoto wadamada sameeya dhaqanka.
Prime Minister joined me in celebrating the hugely successful elections this week in Somaliland. What's more, the winning candidate has announced that one of his first acts will be to legislate against FGM as a direct consequence of work by a British campaigner, Nimko Ali, who deserves this House of...
Please support us.